Okay, so hello everyone. As was already said, I'm Antonín Zita, and I'm one of the EOSC CZ secretaries. And as it was also said, this little presentation is called "How I Learned to Stop Worrying and Love the DMP," which I suppose some of you may know that it's a reference to Stanley Kubrick's film Dr. Strangelove, because just like in the movie, the requirements on DMPs exploded quite a bit in the last few years. And so I'd like to get a few things straight so that we avoid certain myths or misconceptions. I will also try to do a little bit of everything, so I will not necessarily go into in depth too much. But if there's anything you'd like to know more about, then just don't be shy and just ask a question, either right after the presentation or sometime a little later today. All right. So we had a good deal of talk about fair data and how we got to them. What is important also to know that fair data and verifying your data sets is required, which and is not only the Ministry of Education, Youth and Sports that required, but also the funding organizations such as the Great Agency of the Czech Republic. Here we have a little excerpt from, sadly it's only in Czech, but it's from the Ministry of Education and Sports websites, and it talks about open science requirements. And I've noticed, I've highlighted that the research data need to be maintained in accordance with those FAIR principles. Sometimes FAIR data tend to be a bit confused with open data. And sometimes even some of the funders may have some somewhat misleading descriptions of those. So this is a little excerpt from the Grant Agency of the Czech Republic from the website called Open Data. And here they have this little quote here. Open data follows the FAIR principles of findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, or short for FAIR. And I will talk about that shortly, that it's not entirely true. So let's take a look at those FAIR principles. As I said a minute or two ago, I will not go into detail too much because there simply is not a whole lot of time. But this would be a visualization of data, any kind of unsorted. And a subset of it is managed data, which you somehow describe and sort into folders and try to describe with metadata. And you see open data may or may not be FAIR data. If I make a data set publicly available someplace on a website, that can be open, but it's not necessarily FAIR because it's organized in folders that make sense. It's not necessarily described well, so that I don't know what, for example, a spreadsheet really actually describes. It may not have file formats which are common in that scientific field. It may not have any information about the provenance of the data, meaning who created the data and who, for example, submitted it into that repository or archive. So that's open data may not necessarily be FAIR data. FAIR principles, in short, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. I need to be able to find them someplace. I need to be, once I find them, for example, in a catalog, which has metadata from various repositories, I need to be able to access them in some fashion, which may or may not include signing in using, for example, our EduID. They need to be interoperable, meaning that other systems may understand the data that is in that data set. And lastly, they need to be reusable, which is the end goal. It's as much a separate principle as the end goal, because the point is we want to reuse data. And how we reuse them, if the data are in common file formats, if the data have also a license, which tells the users what they actually can or cannot do with the data. And last but not least, you've already probably familiar with this. This little, I will not say a motto, but philosophy of FAIR data is as open as possible, as close as necessary. What does it mean? Is that you should try to open your data for other researchers so that they can reuse your data. But if it's necessary, you don't have to do that. In case of you dealing with sensitive or personal data, or cases such as there being a possibility of commercial use of the data, for example, for a patent, then of course you will not be opening them to others, because that will endanger these principles here. So open the data as much as it can make sense, and as much as you can. These would be the important principles of fair data. Now, let's talk about I won't say elephant in the room, but the term DMP, Data Management Plan. And what is also important to know is that the data management plan, which is also required by various funding organizations, is different than data management planning. The data management plan is a document, and we'll take a look briefly at how it may look and how you can create one. But it's a document. It's a document which describes how you manage your data, and it's a document which you then provide to your funding organization so that they also know that you handle your data well. You know what kind of data you have. But that's not the end goal, because that could sound like only, quote unquote, a bureaucratic necessity rather than something relevant for the researchers. The end goal is the data management planning, which is a process of thinking about what kind of data you have and thinking about what you need to do for your data or with your data so that they are verified or fair and so that others can use them, which can take a while. And it's generally going to be a series of questions you need to ask yourself and your research team and others. This also leads me to what I like to call data management plan myths. And the first myth is, which it says here, information in DMP cannot be changed. Again, some view this as a document which completely describes what you can do, and then you hand it in and you're done with it. But that is not entirely correct. A data management plan is what is called a living document. So it should describe what you actually do with your data, and you should be able to change it based on the phase of the project you are in. So for example, if you're at the beginning of a project, you may not have thought too much about archiving your data, because that's several years away. And that's completely fine. So you probably don't have an exact idea where you want to archive your data and what are the conditions for archiving. But you probably know you'd like to archive the data for some years. So eventually, as you proceed through the project and you get nearer to the end of the project, you should probably have an idea of, okay, we have to think about archiving, so what do we do? And you start looking up the possibilities, and you realize that you have found an option which suits you great, and that's when you put it into data management plan. So it is a living document which changes, and generally the funding organizations require at least 3 different versions of DMP, or at least 3 different steps throughout the project so that you update your DMP. So don't be afraid that once you realize that you should submit your first DMP, roughly, for some funders, it's 6 months into the project. No one is really expecting you to know every single detail, especially about the end portion of the research. Myth number 2, the DMP should contain only the correct solutions. So again, this is a misconception that it's a document that a faceless bureaucrat someplace will check for the correct answers, and if there aren't correct answers, then they will say, well, this is wrong. Ideally, DMP should contain the actual solutions, because it's for you to understand what you are doing with the data, what kind of data you have, and for example, who has, if it's a consortium project, who has rights to the data and who is responsible for what. And actual solutions may differ based on the field you are working in, based on the kind of project you are doing, based on the kind of research you are doing. So just because someone else has different solutions doesn't mean yours are incorrect. They need to make sense for your data. Myth number 3, fair data must always be open data, which I believe should be clear by now. Again, you don't have to publish the data if that makes sense. You should not publish personal data. You can, of course, put an embargo on the data, especially if you want to use them, for example, for publications or other outcomes, and you believe publishing the data ahead of it would endanger that publication, right? And I also mentioned commercializing your data and data sets. Lastly, completing the DMP in Microsoft Word is easier, and we're going to take a look at how it looks in Microsoft Word in a bit. You've probably seen this. Most funders have a template as a Word document, and also the famed Horizon Europe template is in also Microsoft Word document. It doesn't have to be true. It can be. It's not necessarily wrong to do this, but the problem with the template is that we have open-ended answers, and these answers can lead researchers to provide open-ended questions. And these open-ended answers can provide researchers with providing answers that don't necessarily make sense or don't necessarily answer what the question asked about. And this is a fairly common complaint of data stewards and some project managers, that what was asked wasn't really answered. Finally, data management plan is useful only for the funding agency. Again, that's not true. Data management planning is useful for the researchers as well. For you, what it does is showcases what you actually do with data. And I've been advising several research teams on how to write their DMPs. And I've encountered several cases where the team didn't actually know or realize the need to handle with a certain issue. From things like anonymizing data, where there was a research team where they were transcribing audio and video files, and they had transcribers transcribing those, and so that the transcripts are then given to researchers, and so that they don't know, the researchers, who was that person who spoke. But they forgot about making sure that the transcribers actually sign a non-disclosure agreement, so that because they're handling with also personal sensitive data, because they're handling with the audio and video files. And similarly, also encountered researchers which had questions about what happens with my data, and do I need to publish it, do I need to, if I want to commercialize it. And again, the point is the process, the planning, asking questions, coming up with answers, what do you want to do with your data. DMP put simply, AKA, it ain't no rocket science. Basically what it asks you is, will I create data? What data? What standards will I use? Will it be open? Where it will be stored? And these are the major areas that the data management plan asks you about. What kind of data you have, if your data is machine readable or not, how sensitive they are, what kind of formats and standards do you follow, what kind of licenses, short and long-term data storage, which, if you notice, also repository, we'll also ask you about repository, but also oftentimes coming up with the repository helps you solve several of these questions, because the repository generally follows certain licenses and so on and so on. Basically, the following needs to be absolutely clear from the DMP. Yes, we know how to handle our data. Yes, we will create data in these formats and quantities. And yes, we want our data to be fair, because we want to preserve it and therefore increase its value. Because if you preserve data, you can share it, and if you can share it, others can use it in their own research, and so on and so on. Now, this is how the Word file can look like, and I will be alt-tabbing sometimes. Yeah, this is the actual file from Horizon Europe, but this is the National Technical Library bilingual version. And we'll scroll down a bit. You see here a bunch of open-ended questions separated into several chapters. Again, this definitely makes sense for certain teams. There's nothing wrong with answering this, but you have an alternative. The alternative is one of the data management planning tools called Data Stewardship Wizard. Who's familiar with Data Stewardship Wizard? Raise your hands. Okay, surprisingly, Honza is familiar, yes. Quite a few people here. All right, so what we'll do, I'll talk about I'll describe this very briefly, then we'll take a look at the tool, how it looks like, how it behaves, and then we'll talk about some more advanced functions, and again, I'll show you what it can do. So it's a questionnaire open source tool. The open source portion will be important. And questionnaire, means that it's going to ask you questions, and you choose the answers the vast majority of time. There's very little open-ended questions for you to answer in those tools, in the wizard. It's not just a random tool. It is a tool which has been recommended, for example, in the Horizon Europe Program Guide, and it originated in the Elixir infrastructure. So it's not just a tool, but it's a tool which has been proven to be useful in various programs. It helps you track fair metrics so that you know whether how much your data is fair. We'll talk about these in a bit. This is fairly crucial, and it can be misunderstood in a bit. It also helps you filter questions you want to show in the questionnaire so that you answer only questions which are relevant to you. There are several questions which provide external validation. For example, ORCID or DOI. They are linked to databases which check for the actual ORCID, whether that ORCID exists or not, which again helps you provide the correct answers. And it has templates. For example, various funders have their own templates which you can use. And finally, of course, it can help you create the actual document, the actual DMP. I'll also say just one thing. It can also be used for other users rather than just creating a DMP, but this is what we'll be discussing today. Our question is now, okay, so I know what Data Stewardship Wizard is, but how do I get access to it? One option is accessing it through the Elixir infrastructure, which would be at the address dsw.elixir/europe.org. Of course, not every institution is in the Elixir infrastructure. So then until recently, you had two options. First, you could run what is called an institutional instance. The tool is open source. The code is available on GitHub, and every other documentation is also available, which means that if you have the manpower, you can have someone run an institutional instance for you to use at your institutions, right? It, however, means that you need to have a person who understands the tool to a degree, and you also need to have the manpower as well. The advantage is that you can then develop, you not only maintain what is called the knowledge model. The knowledge model, put simply, is basically a model which tells the tool how the questionnaire should look like, how it should appear in the tool. But also you can create your own modifications, and I'll briefly talk about what we have at Maastricht University. Second option, if you are not within the Elixir infrastructure and you do not have a person who has the time or knowledge to maintain, then you could turn to Fair Wizard, which is, simply put, a commercial version of Data Stewardship Wizard, Data Stewardship Wizard as a service. You pay money for maintaining your institutional instance of Data Stewardship Wizard, and therefore you don't need to deal with the technical aspects. And of course, you can have the developers help you with developing specific knowledge models for whatever use cases you want to have. Recently, we also have Data Stewardship Wizard in the National Repository Platform at dmp.eosc.cz. And this will be, what's important here is that it has slightly different knowledge models, and it's also still in pilot mode, meaning it's not completely, it may be a little bit rough around the edges, but what's important here is that, first of all, even though the knowledge model, the questionnaire will look differently, it will still meet the requirements of the various calls and funders. And what's important is that accessible to everyone, with a little asterisk, meaning everyone within the e-infra infrastructure, which should be basically every kind of research institution. And I do have slides here, but as I said, I like to alt-tab quite a bit. So I'm going to show you how you get there. If you go to dmp.eosc.cz, you'll have an introduction here. It will also say that it's in pilot mode currently. You will hit Start Planning, and it will get you to this site. Again, making sure that this is just a pilot, and you have a login screen over here. What you want to do first is this part here. To log into this service, it is first required to register with an e-infra-CZ AAI organization. I'm clicking here. You need to do so even though you already have an e-infra account for technical reasons. We're planning on fixing this, but currently this is how it works. Once you're done registering and agreeing with the terms of the e-infra services, you will be able to click here and log in with your e-infra account using your institutional credentials. And after agreeing to the privacy policies, which currently, I should say, are currently only in Czech, but as far as I know, the English translation is being worked on, you'll get to here. As you see, I already have a few projects here. And I'll just click Create Project. I'll name it Live Demo. I'll choose the project template. And it says Horizon Euro project template. So this one I'm going to choose. I don't want the machine action DMP project template just yet. I'll hit Create. And this is where I get. This is how the tool looks like. Let me go back very quickly to the slides. Yes, I've covered everything over here. I'll briefly talk about how to work with the tool, but I'm running a bit short on time, so I think I have only about 9 minutes, so it will be very quickly. As you see, you have here various phases of the project, which is important, because remember when I talked about that you'll be handing in DMP a couple of times. Based on the phrase you choose, the questions will be marked differently. Notice this one is in red, meaning the tool set tells you, hey, you need to answer this question at this point in the project. This one says, well, this can wait. If I choose different phase, notice the numbers change here, indicating there are multiple required questions you need to answer, and also this changed from the hourglass icon to the red icon. Once I answer this, let's say, let's have a Fedam, our trusty researcher. You'll see it will be marked with a green tick, and I'll provide further questions for further answers. I can input, for example, the ORCID modifier or identifier. Let's try to put a random number here, like this. Let's see if it's going to load up anything. Is Magnus Lundgren over here? No Magnus here. If he were, he could be, in the DSV over here. Several other functions just to quickly go over. Of course, it serves like your average Office tool, so you can share with other users. You can add users. You can add any user who has already registered in the DSW. You can also create a public link and decide, determine what you want others to do with the project, which can be useful if you want to share your DMP outside of the people who actually work on it, but just for others to check or, provide comments. You can also, by clicking next to every question, you can add a comment. You'll type whatever you feel needs to be there. You can mark any question with a to-do, and this will be indicated in this tab over here. And you can jump there from any sort of page, and we'll go to this question and can indicate this needs to be done. What's also important to note is that every change saves automatically, so you're not saving anything on your own. So any change you make, let's say I add role to the Ferda, notice that the change has been added here. You can also name certain versions. So let's name this, let's say, 0.1 version. And you can decide to filter these according to only the named versions for a better clarity. Finally, you can also always go back to an earlier version by clicking the 3 dots over here and clicking revert to this version. This cannot be undone, so be careful when you use it. But again, everything is saved over here automatically. Let me check quickly with my slides if there's everything here. Yes. Versioning, I'll talk about that in a bit. Okay, now I will go back to, I will actually change my Data Stewardship Wizard. I will change from the National Repository Platform one to the one at Maastricht University. You'll notice that it looks completely the same. There's just a different icon. We have, and I'm doing this so that I can show you an actually completed DMP. We can create, of course, the document. When you click Settings here, you choose the template you want to use and the default document format. Let's do HTML. I can save this. And when I hit Preview on the top here, for PDF and HTML, it generates a preview of the data management plan already in the tool. So here we have a history of changes. There's no named version here, but we see that Ferda has been, a busy bee or a busy ant, and he's been working on this one as well. And this is how the completed DMP looks like. What's important here that outside, for example, these terms, descriptions of data sets, every single thing here is created by the tool. It wasn't something you had to write. It was created by you answering generally multiple choice questions or clicking yes, no questions. What's also important, and if I create any documents, they will appear here in the tab Documents, and I can always go back to the files created. And I think this is, we talked about the phases as well, so I don't have to show it right now. I'll talk about one thing, and that's the metrics. And I wanted to show a complete DMP so that you know how the metrics look like. As you see, the Data Stewardship Wizard tracks the FAIR metrics as well as general good DMP practice and openness. Now, what's important to understand here, don't change what you're doing in the project just because you have a lower score here. Low score it's a tool. It cannot interpret what you actually fill in. So remember when we talked about open as possible and close as necessary? If you will have a research project where you will not publish the data, for example, because they are personal or sensitive data and cannot be anonymized in a way where you can make it work, or because you want to use it for a commercial venture, you would score low on reusability. And that's fine. That's fine. It makes still sense. It will just say, well, you're not allowing to reuse your data, but it makes sense for your project. So if you ever use the tool, don't panic just because you have, a different shade of color than green. It's not necessarily false. Secondly, these metrics only serve for you as an overview of what kind of data you have. No one from the funders actually goes through them or has access to them. And it also helps you track how many answers you've answered as well. Let me go back to my slides and I'll check if I think we should be finishing slowly. I talked about chapters. I talked about the questions. Yes, I haven't shown you the metrics in the questionnaire, but let me go to over here. So you see this is how it can look like in the text. You have a multiple choice. This is a question, how long will this data set be kept? And you choose, and depending on what your choice here, this tell you, well, this is very accessible or not as accessible. Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Just a brief, some very near future development, and then the end goal of Data Stewardship Wizard. There will be some additional changes to the knowledge model in the DSV, in the National Repository Platform. There will be such function available, which, if you notice, the DSW is a web tool, and so it's a browser tool, and so we'll be adding this little magnifying glass icon so that you can search through the whole DMP. And finally, there'll be a cross-referencing allowed, which will look like this, and which will allow you to go back to a question which a question is referencing. This would be, and then also there's translation. You've noticed that this is in English. Further translations will be coming next year or the year after that. But the end goal of DMP, or Data Stewardship Wizard, is integration with National Repository Platform as much as possible, so that it will also pre-fill some of the questions based on your research and you being a member of a community or a repository. Because the end goal is for this to make it as easier for the user to use and give you the answers in advance when that is possible. So that is all for me. I need to finish now. Data Stewardship Wizard is a tool which can be used for creating data management plans and help you with data management planning, which is making a realization for you and your team how you handle your data and how fair they are, and whether perhaps you could do something different and improve the reusability of your data, because that's the ultimate end goal. Thank you very much. If you have any questions, don't be afraid to ask. Questions, comments? Yes.
Maybe it's a weird question, but it's a bit fuzzy in my mind. So, if I remember correctly, you said that you generally, for grant purposes, you submit the DMP about half a year in the project.
It's going to depend. It's going to depend on the funding organization.
Not in the beginning, right?
Generally, I think it's the grant agency of the Czech Republic which says that the first DMP should be handed no later than 6 months in. So it allows for handing the preliminary DMP when you're submitting the project, but it's an option. But it should be no later than 6 months in. Others, grant agency or funding organizations, I cannot tell you from off the top of my head, but it's going to generally be fairly soon after the project starts, the first one.
I'll still get into my actual questions. Yeah. But then, you resubmit it as EOSC they usually do on a project?
Yes.
Meaning that you also do things in those times, you do kind of post-facto matches to what you actually.
I mean, it depends on you whether you do it after the fact or you realize, oh, well, wait a second, something happening. For example, someone is going on a maternal leave, right, parental leave. Then you can do it in advance, right? That's whether you do it after the fact or before. Ideally, you do that before so that you plan ahead.
So maybe that actually answering my actual question, but I was wondering where the line is between data management plan and then provenance information. I can see some differences, but I feel like maybe there's also something that they share, because it's also a description of what you do with data.
Mm-hmm. Jan seems to want to comment on that, so I'll give the floor to him, and then perhaps I'll add something.
Actually, a first remark regarding the timing. It depends on the grant call that you are actually doing. Some of the grant agencies, some of the grant providers require you to immediately announce any changes, not only in the team but also regarding the data. So you are supposed to publish the DMP updates once it happens. Or as soon as it is reasonable, possible to do. That's, for example, toucher on the calls that are a contractual research under the research and development, whatever. So there you are actually mandated to do it immediately. But then there are different calls, even under the same funder as Thatcher, the Czech technical agency, where you are required to do it only once a year. Alongside the regular updates of the report. And then there are calls that actually don't ask you to update it anyway. So that's the MSCA, for example. There you can submit the final report without any DMP, and technically it wouldn't be a violation. Like if it is there is nothing bad on it. It's kind of better, it makes the sense. You've already done the document. Ideally you're making it up to date, so that's reasonable to add it to that, but it's not necessarily required. So it's call from call. And as for your question, the DMP is more focused on the planning aspect of it. So you have all the information in one place, but it actually doesn't contain any data in the sense of the research data. and it doesn't actually contain any useful metadata for the research data. It only contains a list of the data sets, as close as it goes to data. But any provenance of the samples of the data on its own, that is supposed to be kept somewhere else, ideally in an ELN, or in some sort of other way, so you can have a physical notebook, or you can take care of the metadata and the provenance of that by other means, but DMP is not taking care of that. Did it answer the question?
Yeah.
We can talk after that during
Yeah.
the break.
So the DMP is for the research team so that they all have a shared understanding of what is going on with the data in every step of the way, from collecting data to labeling, storing, to archiving. And the larger the team and the more partners are in the project, the more important it is. Because often a common sentence I know is that there's a project where there are, for example, 5 different institutions, and there are dozens of people working on that. And researchers say, well, I don't know what they do. I don't know how they handle the data they deal with, and I don't know what's happening on their end. And so ideally that will lead to a shared understanding where, of course, not necessarily every researcher should know exactly everything, but the people making the changes and being aware of those should have an idea so that they know they haven't omitted anything or they haven't made a mistake relying on the partner to do something which the partner may do the same thing for them. Anything else? Any other questions? Okay.